life spent with you. So here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy.
Sometimes when I get up here and preach, I'm reminded of something that happened in 1963. Tells you how old I am. We were in church, and my dad really didn't want to be there, but he was there nonetheless. And I was wondering, I knew he wasn't hard of hearing, but he had a hearing device in his ear with a cord running down. And I thought, I'm not going to ask him. But we went to church and he was there. And my dad didn't smile much. But I noticed that day he was smiling. And I'm going, he surely can't be listening to the preacher. And turns out he wasn't. He was listening to the Dodgers as they were playing in the 1963 World Series. And sometimes when I'm up preaching and I see looks on people's faces, I realize they're no longer as wires hanging down. And I'm wondering, are they really listening or are they tuned into YouTube or something else? So that's a confession. As far as what I'm preaching on this afternoon, that looks interesting to me as well, Austin. Adam made the slide for that, and it does look intriguing. But it was this lesson this afternoon was brought about by something Judy asked me Wednesday night. And we were talking about, well, we were actually talking about the rich man and Lazarus, right? Okay. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do something a little different because there is a different rich man talked about in the pages of the scriptures. So I want you to go into Luke, the 12th chapter. And building on what Judy and I were talking about last night or on Wednesday night, I thought there's a lesson there. And so in the 12th chapter, wait a minute, where'd it go? There it is, song number. Whew, had me worried for a second. Anyways, in Luke 12, there is the story of a man who was extremely wealthy. So let's read through it, and then we'll come back and dissect it. So in 12:13, and someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter over you?" You can kind of see how this would play out. He said to them, "Beware and be on your guard against every form of greed, for not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of his possessions." And he told them a parable, saying, the land of a rich man was very productive. He began reasoning to himself, saying, "What shall I do, since I have no place to store my crops?" And he says, "This is what I will do. I'll tear down my barns, build larger ones, and there I will store all of my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years to come. Take your ease, Eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You, this very night, your soul is required of you. And now, who will own what you have prepared?" So is the man who lays up treasures for himself and is not rich toward God. Well, some great lessons there. Great lessons. But one of the first things we see, money is neither good nor evil. None. It is, it's nothing. It's what we put a worth on. And now we're beginning to move into cryptocurrency, crypto possessions. And I really didn't understand that until the other night, where individuals now are bidding on artwork they will own, but they will never possess. Hard for me to wrap my mind around. Like, you can own a Picasso. Why someone would want a Picasso, I don't know. But you can own a Picasso, but you'll never really have it in your possession. So what's the point? Oh, but I have wealth. I have wealth and I have a Picasso. Where's the Picasso? It's over, well, I don't actually know where it is, but I own it. I've got this paperwork that says I own it. We're beginning to move into that type of transient society. And wealth becomes nebulous. And possession, that becomes a different thing altogether. Now imagine an economist could tell me more about it if we knew an economist. But I imagine that could be told and it could be explained to me. I know that no longer do I use a lot of cash. In fact, as we were driving home this afternoon, we wanted to stop and get something to eat. So I told Linda, you got any cash? And she goes, yeah. Oh, great. Well, give me some. I don't carry it. I find that I can just deal with money other ways. I have this balance, and I take away this by what I purchase. That's what I have. Who needs cash? And for me to be saying these things is tantamount to heresy in my mouth. Because I long said, I don't need a debit card. I don't want one. I don't want a credit card. Don't need one. But I got a debit card and it's almost worn out. So all of us utilize funds. All of us, whether we want to admit it or not, are extremely wealthy. But it doesn't matter if we have a bunch or little. It is the love of money that is the root of all sorts of evil. And some, by longing for it, have wandered away from the truth. That's what Paul wrote to Timothy. And he pointed that out to Timothy. Timothy was a young evangelist, probably not making a lot of money. And just telling him straight out, you're going to run into people that are going to have an ardent love for money. Having money is not wrong at all. And Jesus never condemns this man for having money. But if you'll notice in verse 13, that man had forgotten about others. He had had his money. He enjoyed it. But he had clearly forgotten about others. Go back into the book of James. And in James, let's go into the first chapter and drop down to verse 27. In verse 27, this is pure and undefiled religion in the sight of our God and Father, to visit orphans and widows in their distress, keep oneself unstained by the world. Do good to all men, especially those of the household of faith. We know we have a responsibility. We know that in Galatians 6, early on, bear one another's burdens and thus fulfill the law of the Lord. We are to help one another. To what degree? There's no arbitrary percentage put there, but we're to help. Even this afternoon, as we're going out and grabbing a quick bite of lunch, the woman asked us, will you round it up to $24? Sure. Why? Well, we take that money and we use it to help others. Great. I don't use change anymore because I don't use money anymore. So it's really not out of my pocket. It just take it away from the tally sheet. Give it to those people. We are called upon to be philanthropic where we can and when we can. But it does not mean that we divest ourselves of everything. And that's not what Jesus is saying here. And the man was one who had forgotten about others. And I would like to think that we don't, that we are concerned. And if Greg had a need right now, we would help him with that need. Greg already told you I don't carry money. So I'm off the hook. No, we would help him if he had a need, but a viable need. The rich man had a problem, and he forgot others. Why? Because he was only thinking of himself. And we do that. We think only of ourselves. And we don't want to be that way. Not at all. We want to be open and gregarious, reaching out to others. But see, the rich man had a philosophy, not unlike the Epicureans. Look at verse 19 of Luke 12, where it said, we'll take our ease. We'll eat. We'll drink. We'll be merry. We'll have a good time in life. That's what we're going to do. Because I've worked hard. I've labored hard. And I deserve this. So I realize that I'm not going to live forever. So let's celebrate in life right now. That's the Epicureans. Back in 1 Corinthians 15th chapter. And dropping down at verse 32. You find that Paul writes, if from human motives I fought with wild beasts in Ephesus, what does it profit me? If the dead are not raised, let us eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. See, that's that philosophy. But we know there's something greater. We cannot live life with wanton pleasure. We enjoy life what we have. But it's not eat, drink, and be merry. That's all the man could think of. But we realize there's something greater. We harmonize it, we blend it together. And we take out of life the good things. And part of the good things is, yes, the accumulation of enough money to be comfortable, enough money to help others, enough money to, if we desire, to help our children after they're adults. But see, his thinking was wrong. Because all he could think about was right now. This is all I know is right now. Let's eat, drink, and be merry. For tomorrow we die. And how many people do we know like that today? That live with that philosophy each and every day. That's all they can think about, consume. And they become voracious in their consumption. So that when the time of need comes, it goes back to, the virgins. That when the time of need came, when the bridegroom came, they were unprepared, whereas the others were prepared. Let's learn something else from the rich man. In verse 20, in verse 20 of Luke 12, what we find is that he became so self-absorbed. I mean, yes, he forgot the real joy of life when he was thinking about it's just all about eat, drink, and be merry. He'd forgotten about the joy. But in verse 20, you see, you fool, this very night your soul is required of you. And now, what will you own? Who will own what you have prepared? He was so caught up in materialism that he never really took time for the weightier matters of life. How many of us have done the same thing? Forgot about the weightier matters. Forgot about our soul, the inner man, that which differentiates us from the animals. Yeah, animals are animated. They are able uh, to do the various things that they do, but they're not like us. We are created in the image of God, as we talked about this morning. And as such, we have an inner part of us that will continue on. And this life is given to us to prepare for that time, to prepare for when we depart from this mortal realm. There are any number of passages we could look at that would serve to support that. Matthew, the 16th chapter, and verse 26. Over in the book of 1 Timothy, 6th chapter, verses 9 and 10. Again, bring that to mind. As well as Mark 10, verse 24. Our soul is given to us as the most valuable thing we have. What will a man give in exchange for his soul? What would it take to get you to sell out your soul? Robert Johnson, it was said that he went to the crossroads on Highway 61, came to the crossroads, and there he sold his soul in order that he could play blues guitar. And so that was what his price was, according to legend. What do we sell our soul out for? Rank materialism? Whether we have a lot or a little. Again, it's our attitude toward those things. But what we have inside, the inner man, the psyche, the pneuma, is more important than any stock portfolio. And so basically, as you look at how this plays out, the rich man had to figure out what was more valuable. All that he possessed, the materialism he was able to accumulate, or his soul. Materialism we know in the here and now. It is something we can reach out and touch. This phone. This phone is an amazing thing. Do you realize that in this phone that I throw around so cavalierly has a computing capability of a greater degree than what was on the space capsule going to the moon? At least that's what I've heard. I find it hard to fathom. But even to think that in this phone, that it has the computing capabilities of those big IBM computers back in the late 50s, early 60s. This would run rings around him. The knowledge that's contained therein. That's more than a phone. And we have things like that we take for granted. Got a laptop, got a projector, got a phone. Materialism. But all of those things are nothing compared to the inner man. And the Word of God is living and sharper than any two-edged sword, aiming, able to pierce into the inner man, separating the soul and the spirit. Tells me I need to stand back and look again. Austin, as we surrounded the table this morning, was talking about a new and better you this year in 2024. And have you made decisions? And going forth, are you going to be better? Challenge yourself to be better. Well, this man was so caught up with materialism that he had forgotten about his inner person. And again, I come back, and it doesn't matter how much or how little or to what degree. If you're allowing all that to grab hold of you, you need to take a step back and reassess where you're headed. Next part, back in Luke 12. Look at verse 19. In verse 19, I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. Now notice, some people argue about which side is the pneuma and the psyche. The separation between soul and spirit is minute. And God's the one who differentiates. So the man knew he had kind of a motivating aspect of life. So that's all he's talking about here. He's talking to his inner man. So he said, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years to come. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. He forgot he was mortal. At least he didn't think that death was going to visit him anytime soon. And he had a false impression of how long he would live. Oh man, we've got it nailed. I've worked to such a degree that I can kick back. We don't know. We don't know what life's going to bring. We truly don't. Back in Psalms 90, verses 9 and 10, talks about how long we're going to live. 70, fourscore due to strength. Ricardo was talking to me today, and he was saying that his father and I are the same age. And I'm going, no, it can't be. I look at Ricardo with his gray hair, and it's more pronounced now that he cut it short. And I go, no. But yeah, life has a way of creeping up on us. Do you realize 1974, there's a few of you here this afternoon who will remember it. 1974 was 50 years ago. What were you doing in 1974? What were you doing? Ralph was getting out of college or going to college. Going to college with your big afro hairdo, riding your motorcycle. That's what Ralph was doing. Linda informed me today that she was staying at home with a 2-year-old son. And then she reminded me I was working all the time, which I was at the time. I don't know what Mary was doing. Dolores, you were just a little itty bitty thing. You were 2 years old, giving your mother trouble. I hope you gave her a lot. But yeah, 50 years ago, flies by. Do you realize that the earthquake that happened here in Northridge was 30 years ago this weekend? 30 years. Life flies by. I remember that morning going to George Ann's, getting her out of her apartment, getting over to our house where she would be safe. Other people coming to our house. It seems like yesterday, watching as houses exploded in the valley. We're mortal beings. We don't know how much time we have. Back in the book of Ecclesiastes, the 8th chapter, Solomon writes the following. You can see it on the overhead. For there is a proper time and procedure for every delight. So stop and chew on that for a minute. There's a time to enjoy the things we've worked for. Solomon, throughout the Ecclesiastes, says that's great, that's good. Just don't let it take hold of your life. When a man's trouble is heavy upon him, if no one knows what will happen, who can tell him when it will happen? We just don't know. So that man didn't know anything, but he thought he did. And I'm not saying we go around in life thinking fatalistically, because if you look at the book of Ecclesiastes again, Solomon says, don't do that. Celebrate life, enjoy life, and remember your Creator in the days of your youth. Remember Him. And then he builds to old age. So this rich man is so confused. And he could have had it all. He could have had the spiritual side and the physical side. But as Jesus pointed out to him, he lost it all. Because he was so focused on self and satisfying self with materialism that he lost it all. Because what he really lost out on was he forgot God. God was left out of the equation. And he may have been buku rich. Look back at verse 21. Luke 12:21. So is the man who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. The whole parable, the whole of everything Jesus was teaching here is centered in and around the fact that this man could have had all from column A as long as he had column B in alignment. And that was a relationship with the God of heaven. That's what he's talking about. He wasn't rich toward God. Ralph was asking me this morning if in the 15 minutes that is going to come as a tie-in to the lesson I preached this morning, if I was going to talk about Matthew, the 22nd chapter and verse 37. I said, sure, that the love of God is the primal thing that we're called upon to do. God loves us as an extension. He created man out of all the love that he had. And what does God ask in return? That we love him. And not just a superficiality, but that love be true, genuine, lasting. It has been an honor to watch the various young couples who have passed through Winnetka over the years, to watch them as they grow in their relationship, as it develops, and to see that love develop more and more and more. Or to go and see people that have been married for a lot longer, people that you knew them when they were children, then you perform their wedding for them, and now, 30 years later, to see how their relationships have grown and developed. It's wondrous. It's an honor. And it is so beautiful to see. It is more beautiful than any painting you could ever look at. A couple weeks ago, Linda and I were members at LACMA, LA County Museum of Art. And so we decided we're going to go and check it out. So we went there. Some beautiful things, some not so beautiful things. But when you see a couple who have come to the full knowledge of the need for this physically and this spiritually and blend it together, it's magnificent. And so it is when you see individuals who are able to attain a level of financial security, maintain equitability with their family, and still have a positive relationship with God. It's magnificent. And it is an honor to see that, to watch it grow to that level. There's nothing wrong with wealth. There's nothing wrong with having things. There's nothing wrong with driving a nice car or even an old truck like Jim DeArcy had today that was brought back into a state of refinement. Nothing wrong with that. Or to have the whiz-bang yellow vehicle that Jason drives around. Nothing wrong with it. Or to drive around in the green gobbler that Linda drives in. Doesn't matter. You're not going to be judged on the car you drive. You're going to be judged on your love of God. And this rich man could have had it all of it, provided that he would maintain a relationship with God. So, is there an example in the New Testament that talks about somebody who had it all together? Yeah, there is. His name was Joseph, and he was also known by a nickname. And if you've watched one of my shorts recently, and that sounds kind of bad, but it was one of the shorts I did for YouTube. It was dealing with nicknames. And one of the people that I noted on there was Joseph, a Levite of Cyprian birth, who was named Son of Encouragement by the brethren. And what that name was, translated meaning son of encouragement, was Barnabas. Go to Acts, the 4th chapter. Look down at verse 36. Acts 4:36. And Joseph, a Levite of Cyprian birth, who was called Barnabas by the apostles, parenthetically now, which translated means son of encouragement, and who owned a tract of land, sold it, brought the money, and laid it at the apostles' feet. So he took it. He undoubtedly felt he could afford it, sold it, and brought it to the apostles. Now you read later on about Barnabas and the things that he was about. And they're all laudable. And yes, there was a situation between he and Paul as they wanted to go again on one of their tours. Barnabas wanted to take his relative, John Mark. Paul said no. He deserted us as we were about ready to enter into Pamphylia. And there was a sharp disagreement between them. Barnabas went on to the work with John Mark, and Paul went on to the work with Silas. But Barnabas was a man of wealth, and he did what he could with what he had. Now, Ananias and Sapphira, chapter 5 of Acts, they had property. They sold it. And then they conspired between themselves, saying, well, let's say we sold the property for thus and such, and we'll keep some of it back. But we'll tell everybody we sold it for that amount. In other words, they were going to lie. But what Peter does, Peter, as you drop down there and begin reading it, in verse 4, while it remained unsold, did it not remain your own? And after it was sold, was it not under your control? Why is it you have conceived this deed in your heart? You have not lied to men, you've lied to God. So even after you sold it, you had the right to allocate any portion thereof. 10%, 20%, 50%, or even 1%. Doesn't matter. It was yours to do. But don't lie to God and say, we gave it all, when you really didn't. But it's always been under your control. Whatever we own, it's under our control. And that includes our soul and what we're going to do with it. So it's not wrong to be wealthy. It's not wrong at all. But what is wrong is when we do not take and make due application to our spiritual side and allow our wealth, either great or little, to consume us and to have that as the driving part of our life. Now, see, if you were to go over to Luke 15 and look at the rich man there, he was again characterized. He didn't care about Lazarus. He didn't care about the poor that were coming to him. And yes, when he died, found himself in torments. Some argue that he died and he knew he had not done the right things in life, and it tormented him the rest of his days. Well, we don't have enough time to look at all that. But I've got a lesson on hell and Tartarsus that'll break out before too long. And one dealing with the rich man and Lazarus. We'll talk about both. But I do think it's important every once in a while to go back and put things in proper perspective. I would dare say if you were to ask any one of us, we would say we're not wealthy. We are. We are. Just pointed out the cell phone. Everybody here's got a cell phone, right? Anybody don't have a cell phone? Do you realize Solomon in all his glory did not have a cell phone? Everybody here got a microwave? Solomon did not have a microwave. Do y'all have air conditioning? What about indoor plumbing? What about running water? See, all the things we take for granted, people around this world don't have. People in the times past didn't have. We are wealthy. So where we need to begin looking at is getting that wealth on a spiritual side. aligning ourselves tighter with the God of heaven more and more. Well, the lesson is yours this afternoon, and I knew it wouldn't be one of any depth. I just wanted to hit some interesting points. And Linda asked me as we were leaving, when are you going to do another Stump the Chump? So either next week or the week after, we'll do another rousing session of Stump the Chump. For those of you that don't know what that is, it's on the spur of the moment. You can ask a question, and I will try to answer it with book, chapter, and verse. And there's some interesting questions that are asked. But the lesson is yours this afternoon. But if there's any here that might be subject to the invitation in any way, we would invite you to come while we stand and sing.